Hello, I'm Pamela Cucinell, and I'm going to run us through some astrology about Saturn going into Pisces starting March 7th, 2023. Now, usually the first day that Saturn enters into a new sign, something occurs, an event in the news that mirrors the energy of that sign and signals it's time for structural accountability in a specific area. So let's look at the past few years with Saturn having been in Aquarius to better understand what's ahead. The day that Saturn entered Aquarius on March 22nd, 2020, U.S. Chairman Alan Greenspan remarked on the, quote, economic challenges in the new century, end quote. It must be noted that we were 20% into the new century, but these are the remarks he made. Although most people probably did not read or hear his complete perspective, he did recognize the shifts occurring within business, energy, and global concerns. And he stressed, and this is his quote, societies cannot thrive if significant segments perceive their functioning as unjust. Despite the considerable progress evident in recent decades in reducing racial and other forms of discrimination, this job is far from complete, end quote. The term woke, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, seeped into the mainstream from African American slang to be morphed into what is now a toxic buzzword to conservative agenda, because woke came to the mainstream during the rise of Black Lives Matter movement. This 2022 Saturn in Aquarius has highlighted the divide within society to acknowledge and be accountable to white privilege. Why? Because Aquarius is about humanitarian responses within the social collective, yet conceptual divisions have been crystallized at this time. Saturn delineates and hardens the structures, which can also shatter when brittle or if they lack integrity. The documentary The Summer of Soul, if you haven't seen it, you got to see it, was released during Saturn's run in Aquarius and has incredible footage of the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival. The entire concerts were filmed but sat in storage for decades. An absolute jewel of a film. It is rich, evocative, moving, with fabulous music and performances. And if woke means uncovering more such treasures, then bring it on. Of course, Saturn entered Aquarius as COVID closed down social activities and human interaction. With Pluto in Capricorn, it was an extreme example of corralling humanity. Schisms occurred between those who felt controlled, those who felt socially responsible, and some who spiraled into extreme fear of interaction with people, and everything in between. Yet, with Saturn in Aquarius, social media exploded. Businesses adapted to new ways to function, and people explored creative connections digitally, outdoors, and even on rooftops. Conspiracy theories multiplied and gained visibility. Nothing was too out there to gain some traction. Aquarius is the sign of the alien, eccentric, and the unique. Allegiances had to be declared, and friendships, another Aquarian keyword, became more limited or loyal, depending on perspective. Part of the dark side of Aquarius as a sign is the tendency to be imperious, superior, righteous. As the farthest planet, of our solar system that is seen by the naked eye, Saturn represents boundaries. It's the planet that echoes how we structure our lives, and it's symbolic of Lord Karma, discipline, and order. Aquarius is the sign of the humanitarian. Most Aquarians tend to think that their point of view is the best one for humanity, and their innate objectivity reinforces that. Yet, objectivity without compassion is not the best thing for humanity. Insensitivity, coldness, and distancing can all be manifestations of a strong Aquarian nature. The Aquarian influence can relate to one's ethical or theological humanitarianism. Not all, but there are religions with strict and narrow rules that influence or demand how a person views humanity. This sheds light on why religious allegiances have dominated the increased polarity of politics, society, neighborhoods, and even families. Over the past few years, we have seen how Saturn in Aquarius emphasize these extreme polarities. The my way or the highway, end of discussion attitude has crystallized and created seemingly intractable schisms. As Pluto finishes its run in Capricorn, many of us are tired, isolated, demoralized, and wary that new orientations are even possible. And yet, hope is about to wash over our parched spirits like a soft, welcome rain. Of course, hope looks different depending on what side of the schism one stands. If you were born between 1991 and 1993, your natal Saturn is probably in Aquarius, and you've just experienced your first Saturn return. You can read more about this on my website, insightoasis.com. As we enter Saturn in Pisces, if you're old enough, think back to 1994 through 1996. Often there's an echo to that time. It won't be exactly the same, since the outer planets create new geometric configurations to symbolize energetic shifts and evolutions. If you were a child in the mid-90s, the experience might have been your parents' and not yours, really, but you felt the benefits or the repercussions. The clue to analyzing Saturn's results at that time is, did anything change structurally for you, or was anything severely limited? This may be an indication of how much impact Saturn through Pisces will have for you now. We are all shifting from one area of concentration to another. It's subtle or unrelenting, depending on how directly you are affected by the transits. If you know where Pisces falls in your personal horoscope, this is the area of life where you will be required to take stock and confront any fears. A transit of Saturn forces us to do what we don't feel like doing, and it's advisable to give our best effort because the alternative is depressing. Some passages are harder than others, which depends on our personal relationship with responsibility, making commitments, showing up, and setting boundaries. Saturn was happy as a clam in its journey through Capricorn and Aquarius. Those are the signs that I linked to the planet Saturn. But that did not feel good to most of us. Capricorn and Aquarius are signs that are comfortable when linked to Saturn because they thrive on the predictable. Okay, you might think, Capricorn, yes. Capricorn's predictable, routine, uniform, goals. But Aquarius? Aquarius represents the individual and freedom, which means nothing without an order from which to rebel. Saturn in Capricorn brought out all the problems with our unsustainable status quo institutions and systems, and through Aquarius, the radical moves for change. The results since 2018 have been extreme because Pluto, which symbolizes irrevocable transformation, traveled through Capricorn. To say it another way, when Saturn is in Capricorn, rules comfort those who like rules and create a barrier for those who don't. In Aquarius, Saturn's rules become more individualistic, but they are rules nonetheless. Once Saturn is in Pisces, the rules morph, erode, or even dissolve. And for anybody who thinks that I'm dissing the sign of Aquarius too much, I have a lot of Aquarius in my personal horoscope, so I know the pluses and the minuses. Pisces is the end of the zodiacal wheel, but it is also the womb and launches the spring equinox and Aries pioneer spirit. As Saturn makes its way through Pisces, we are invited to shed layers that may hold us back. At the same time, we want to encourage creativity, dreams, and our heartfelt wishes. We can transcend the heaviness of past disappointments if we are willing to do so. The snare of Pisces is to feel victimized, helpless, or unheard. The antidote is to create spiritual hygiene routines. Meditate, make art, sing, dance, listen to music, walk in nature. Choose to release worry and embrace potential. To paraphrase the great spiritual teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, worry is a waste of time. A classic metaphor for Saturn and Pisces is a gorgeous sand sculpture that is pulled back into the sea by the tide. Nowadays, it's easy to capture its image before it's swept away. But the important thing about the metaphor is that it wipes clean the present perception of achievement and leaves a blank canvas for the next realization. Our consciousness is evolving, and the Piscean passage reminds us that we can't really know what is ahead until we're there. With Pluto in Capricorn since 2008, financial systems, government, education, money invested for retirement, transgender rights, class systems, abortion rights, in vitro and surrogate births, organ donors, the consequences of inadequate health care, and the aging population are all hitting critical junctures, critical questions. Climate change events encourage investment decisions and accountability for survival. And yet, there is a steadfast resistance or sheer indifference to what science suggests. The separate camp mentality has increased in brittleness and the absurd. Two major planetary passages occur in March 2023, Saturn in Pisces, and then later Pluto in Aquarius, as well as Mars moves into Cancer after being in Gemini for months and months and months, and the spring equinox. Oh, and there's a new moon. But there's always a new moon and a full moon in the month. Pluto enters Aquarius on March 23rd, 2023, and we'll hear more about that in my next presentation. This focus is on Saturn and Pisces, even though I've talked at length about Saturn and Aquarius that we're just coming off of, which will create more extremes as certain things become untenable. But it also invites one to swim in new directions. The 12 feet of snowfall that happened in California just a few days before Saturn goes into Pisces is a harbinger of these shifts. So Pisces is often depicted by two fish in a circle after one another's tails. This yin-yang image speaks of the oneness in what appears to be opposites, or two. Extreme perspectives may soften over the next few years, but history indicates this happens when society is forced to feel the cost. It'd be nice to think that we won't be forced to feel the cost, but let's go back to the past couple of times that Saturn was in Pisces. The last time Saturn traveled through Pisces, May 1993 to April 1996, was a tumultuous time throughout the world. The outer planets color how Saturn transits are reflected in our world, and at the times, Pluto was in the last degrees of Scorpio, the sign linked to death, sex, power, and transformation. And then it was in the first degrees of Sagittarius, world affairs, justice, religion. At that time, Nelson Mandela became president in South Africa with its first multiracial election. The USA ended the long embargo against Vietnam that had stemmed from the 60s of the war. When Saturn revisits a sign, we often see a reevaluation of what was going on the last time. The spectrum of Pisces arcs from victim to savior. So it's interesting, Mandela went from being a prisoner in the 60s to a president in the 90s. Vietnam went from the enemy of the United States to a trade partner. The fervor can fester or explode with Saturn in Pisces, and this was shown with the slaughter of the Tutsis in Rwanda, horrific human rights violations and genocide ran through the Serbia-Croatia conflict, which was justified by ethnic cleansing. A peace agreement happened in Bosnia, and it was reached in 1995, so it's very condensed. The peace process in Ireland began with the talks by the nationalist parties, IRA, and different factions looking to end sporadic violence that had plagued the countries for years. A federal building in Oklahoma City was bombed by a U.S. Army veteran, resulting in the deaths of 168 people, including 19 children. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a religious righteous opposed to peace negotiations with the Palestinians. The Taliban gained major control in Afghanistan, and Osama bin Laden issued his declaration of jihad on Americans. As we look at innovation and creativity at that time, always a hot thing with Saturn and Pisces, well, wherever Saturn is, we can see what's going on with fashion, etc. The first successfully cloned mammal, Dolly the sheep, was born in Scotland. And in fashion, the look was relaxed, minimal, and grunge came in. The television series Friends launched the fantasy of large apartments for young people in New York City And the conceptual artist Jeremy Deller, born with Saturn in Pisces in 1966, summed up the trends in the art world at this time. He said, I realized that I didn't have to make objects anymore. I could just do these sort of events, make things happen, work with people, and enjoy it. Very Piscean. Don't have to make objects, just create a mood. Further back, when Saturn was in Pisces between March 1964 and March 1967, we also experienced the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. It was a time of imperative and irrevocable change. Saturn in Pisces mirrored the flood of vanguard ideas and the dissolution of, quote, normal routines as the ongoing Vietnam War, with its protests, the voices of civil rights and feminist movements, a growing awareness of Earth, sustainability, and the explosion of drug and music experimentation to find new ways of being. So, with that in mind, what can we expect from Saturn in Pisces this time? Pisces represents the universal unconscious, the psychic ocean all we human beings swim in, whether we know it or not. When the collective consciousness hits a true momentum, oh yes, the tipping point number of people who now perceive the same awareness, the birth of the new, can sweep into Saturn's next trip around the zodiacal wheel. So we're in a time of sloughing off old concepts and opening very quickly to the new. That's why conscious awareness, intentional visualizations, and meditations are so important, because our unconscious collective determines the direction of how awake we become as a human race, or if we evolve. Does that mean we have to be more woke? I'll let you think about that. The Ingress horoscope shows the Virgo full moon occurs right before Saturn enters Pisces. This speaks of the healing potential during this cycle of Saturn, especially after the first year. It's charged with spiritual creativity to unite generations for focused action. With Pluto in the last pass of Capricorn, the imperative for us to address unhealed wounds accelerates. In other words, it's time for us to admit where the pain, where the wounds are, and to get on with life. Make atonement. Do the things that are the right things to move forward. It's time. Not sweeping them under the rug, doing the hard healing work. Because Pluto moves into Aquarius the end of March 2023, we can anticipate fast erosion of outworn structures. Unfortunately, this will probably include some architecture on the physical Earth. Mandates for sustainability can fast forward, perhaps accelerated by further signs of poisoned water and climate costs. Government structures and officials who no longer truly represent the people will lose their grip. Violence might increase before public opinion shifts the tide. The past few years have shown us what can happen when fascist and intolerant powers dictate outcomes. When Saturn is in Pisces, we can choose to allow them to run amok, and historically, people have, or we can make strides for peace and creative solutions. And historically, people have. Music and art can provide immediate bridges for collaboration. ChatGPT, digital imagery, and an inability to determine what's real will demand concrete boundaries and accountability. But once again, the situation may become critical before the collective makes change. If you were born between May 1993 and April 1996, you're on your first Saturn return. Or if you were born between March 1964 and March 1967, your second Saturn return. And you can go to my website, insightoasis.com, put Saturn return in search, and read more about that there. So I wish us all a beautiful, creative, peaceful Saturn in Pisces passage.